At first, it seems like another nightmare. In this dream, I walk a long, winding road through a warped version of Gotham. I've dreamt of this road before. I've seen the terrors that await me at its end. And yet, every time, I keep walking. Every time I think, this time will be different. And this time, I'm right. Today, on the Comic Book Report, we'll be taking a look at Harleen. So stick around and check it out. Greetings from Gotham, comic fans. My name is Dominic, and you are watching the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today, I have a real treat for you all, because today we're taking a look at Harleen, and this one is definitely a gem. But before we dive in, a few quick facts about today's collection. Apologies, I cannot find how to pronounce this gentleman's name, but I'll give it a shot here. Harleen was written and penciled by Stjepan Sejic. The issues collected in this volume were published by DC Comics in 2019. This hardcover collects Harleen issues 1 through 3 and comes in at 208 pages. And it should be noted that Harleen has been published as part of DC's Black Label imprint. I believe it received Black Label because there is some profanity, some vulgarity, violence and blood, and some minor sexual situations, but no real nudity. In my opinion, I would compare it to something like a PG-13 movie. Before we jump in, I just want to issue a brief spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents and commenting on plot points. You've been warned. Now let's go get started. Okay, and here's your first look at that Harleen hardcover that I mentioned. And just a few things to note right off the bat. This is not the first edition of this collection, which I didn't realize. I believe that edition has a partially translucent cover that has kind of the half mask slip off her face to reveal what's behind it. That is not this edition, but I'm still very happy with what I got, and they still made it pretty beautiful. And I'll show you what I mean under the dust jacket in a moment. But as we continue to look at this collection too, you might notice that the format size is definitely atypical. It's not your standard size, nor is it a traditional oversized format. This is definitely more of a square dimensioned kind of book, which makes it a little uneven on most library shelves. However, it is beautiful to read. And here's that under the dust jacket art that I promised. We get this intensely vulnerable and kind of shocked looking Harley right here, which when you look at it juxtaposed with the actual cover of the dust jacket where you see the Harley Quinn mask, it's just striking. And like I said, I believe with the first edition, the dust jacket was partially transparent so that it slid right over and the half mask slid over the bloody side of her face. Even without that first edition touch, I'm still so pleased that they gave us the under the dust jacket art reproduced on this edition. And here's a quick side-by-side of both of those images. You can probably tell that this is going to be a book that really emphasizes some beautiful artwork. Okay, now let's go ahead and jump into the collection proper. Gosh, I just love how this thing was built. It's just so art-centric, and I think that that really serves this collection well. As I mentioned, Harleen is a 3-part book. We get these oversized issues, and at its core, Harleen is really just an origin story of how Harleen Quinzel became Harley Quinn. And frankly, this creator instilled more life into this character than I have ever seen in any incarnation, and really provoked a depth of feeling I did not know I could have for some of these characters. I first became aware of this book a few months ago, and I was really interested, but I was always on the fence because of that Black Label. For those that don't know, I really don't read comic books that have any kind of nudity, and I was concerned when I read about this book, especially given some of the other titles this author has done. Hey, is this going to be way too over-sexualized? Because if so, great art aside, I'm not interested. But the more I read up and the more I heard from others, it sounded like that really wasn't the case here. And I'm happy to say, for the most part, it really wasn't. Harleen did have some kind of sexual situations, but no real nudity, and it wasn't obnoxious. Like I said, I really equate it to like a PG-13 movie, and that definitely made it more enjoyable for me. because I probably wouldn't have read it if it was too graphic. And I would have missed out, because this is a real prize here. The creator presents a real lived-in world with real believable characters. This book has some real deep psychological underpinnings and clear character motivations that make everything that happened within this volume just kind of logically track in a very believable way. As a reader, we're treated to Harleen's narration of how she kind of became what she's become and where she's at. The voice in this book almost feels like you're reading a diary entry, and it is just so effective. And while we've had a lot of Harley origin kind of books and other media, I've never seen it in a way that's so affecting. The author presents Harleen as a brilliant psychiatrist and doctor who kind of struggles to find her way within her profession. Not because of her lack, but because of some of her baggage and history. We learn in these pages that Harleen slept with one of her college professors, which has kind of haunted her both in her academic and professional life, with many of her peers and colleagues kind of treating her as someone who's only made it because she kind of slept her way to the top, so to speak, when what we know instead was that she was brilliant, but regrettably had a dalliance that led to such gossip and blackballing. So we pick up with Harleen at a symposium where she's kind of delivering this thesis that people can kind of lose a sense of empathy in a way that's like a disease that hopefully can be cured. This idea for research leads her into kind of a scholarship from Bruce Wayne to research the effects of empathy loss and how you can avoid it or reverse it. However, before she comes to the point where she's able to interview and see the patients that fill up Arkham Asylum, she finds herself caught up in the middle of a battle on the street between Joker, his gang, and Batman. Things turn violent and horrific for Harleen, who is basically held at gunpoint by the Joker, who decides to not pull the trigger and let her live. This moment breaks her for a minute, this moment of trauma where she doesn't understand why he let her live, and it basically just puts her into a state of shock that also gives her just recurring nightmares about the Joker. Of course, she doesn't mention this incident to anyone, and she goes ahead and starts residency at Arkham Asylum. At this point, we get a ton of really great kind of psychiatry sessions with some of the inmates, which comprise some of Batman's rogues gallery. At this time as well, the asylum is run by Hugo Strange, which is another fun little wrinkle within this tapestry. And as a reader, we know that we're just waiting for the moment that Harleen encounters the Joker again. And in my opinion, it really doesn't disappoint. In many ways, the creator's approach to Harleen was to make this love story almost like a tragic soap opera within the Batman universe. Throughout the pages, we get sort of a slow seduction as Harleen kind of comes under the spell of Joker, who is depicted kind of beautifully by the creator. And it's hard for me to say whether that's what he actually looks like in this universe or whether we are seeing the way Harleen sees the Joker. This book is also extremely well paced. You know, the plotline is overall pretty simple, but it just teases itself out in a way that just is believable and really good. And the feel I get from this is almost like watching Silence of the Lambs if Hannibal Lecter and Clarice Starling fell in love. Every moment you have with the Joker in his cell at Arkham, it has that tension and that kind of unease you would have watching Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, but with some weird romance angles. And I don't use this word often, but this book is truly spellbinding. To see the character of Harleen kind of mentally unravel and come back together as something else is just really wild to see. And I'm sure that this is one of those books that I will get new things out of it every single time I go back to reread. And it's been a while since I've read characters that felt this living and breathing real. And I think it's such a great strength that you can read a book set in Gotham with all of these crazy, almost cartoonish supervillains and feel like you're reading a realistic story that seems so grounded. In this way, it's kind of similar to Gotham Central for me. Batman is kind of in it tangentially, but he's really not even the point. And as the title suggests, this really isn't about Harley Quinn as much as it's about Harleen Quinzel, and that is to this book's strength. And while it's really an origin story and a love story, Harleen is really so much more than that. And there are things within these pages for just about everyone. And now that I think I've kind of discussed the plot line as well as needed, I like to just focus again on the art. This man is a true artist. Some of the images look almost photoreal, which is then so impressive when it's juxtaposed against some of these dreamy backdrops. It's almost hard for me to describe. This is a book that you really have to see for yourself to really understand. And it's a book that this different format as far as the page size, it was just such a joy. It made you feel like you got more artwork, more bang for your buck, and it just worked for the story. There was also a good amount of traditional paneling and just very creative out-of-the-box splash pages or formatting that was just such a good mix. This was a book for me too that I started reading and just knew this is going to be a classic. This is going to be a book people are talking about 5, 10, 15 years and more about. I could go on, but honestly, we've reached the end of the collection, so I think it's time we go ahead and gave Harleen a grade. For some of the most exceptional art I have ever seen, coupled with some layered and nuanced characters that further enrich Batman's world and the Batman mythos in general, it should be obvious by now, but the Comic Book Report has to give Harleen an A. Books like this sometimes are why I read comics in the first place. This was a perfectly executed, character-driven story that made me care for old characters in new ways. It's a modern classic that I would recommend to any Batman fan. If you haven't checked out Harleen yet, I encourage you to do so if this looks like something up your alley. For me, this was definitely one to remember. And that's going to do it today for the Comic Book Report. Thank you so much for watching. Please feel free to subscribe to my channel, and have a good one.